Due to the morbid curiosity and sensationalism that may surround this subject, which I feel uncomfortable profiting from, I will be donating this video's ad revenue for the month to Doctors Without Borders. Stick around to the end of the video to see how you can join me in donating and hear about some of the vital work they do. On the 25th of October 2016, tragedy struck at Dreamworld as a malfunction on the Thunder River Rapids ride resulted in the deaths of 4 people. The following court cases would find that the accident was caused by improper maintenance and lack of staff training, and Dreamworld owners Ardent Leisure would be fined $3.6 million for a breach of the Work Health and Safety Act. In the nearly 10 years since one of Australia's worst theme park accidents in history, much has changed, not only at Dreamworld but elsewhere in Queensland and even around the rest of the country. In today's video, we're going to explore the impact of the tragedy on the Australian amusement industry by asking the question, what if it had never happened? What if Dreamworld's maintenance and staff training had never slipped to those levels and tragedy had never struck at all? How would Dreamworld look different? What might be different about the operations of other parks around the country? And what has changed behind the scenes about the way our parks approach maintenance, safety, and staff training? Let's explore this alternate timeline where the Thunder River Rapids tragedy of 2016 never occurred. Of course, I need to begin this video by stating that the most important thing that would have changed if the Thunder River Rapids tragedy never occurred is that 4 people would never have lost their lives. More important than any changes to a theme park, legislative changes, or changes in procedure were the impacts that this tragedy had on the friends and families of 4 innocent people. This video is not intended to reduce that human tragedy in any way, but simply to explore, nearly 10 years on, how tragedy has shaped the history of our theme parks. I want to extend my utmost sympathy and respect to anyone who was directly impacted by the tragedy. But if Dreamworld's maintenance and procedures had not been negligent that day and in the years preceding it, what kind of park might it be today? And what kind of amusement industry would our Australian parks exist in? We're going to explore the response to the incident from Dreamworld, from other parks, from the state of Queensland, and from around Australia, and theorise how things might have been different if none of those changes had been made. To begin, we should first look at what changed at Dreamworld itself in the aftermath of the tragedy. In the immediate aftermath of the day, Dreamworld remained closed to the public for 6 weeks as investigations commenced. Upon reopening, Gold Rush Country was entirely fenced off to the public, while every other ride in the park was closed until it passed an external safety audit, which was conducted by a company engaged by Ardent Leisure called Pit and Sherry Operations. The rides reopened in stages after Pit and Sherry completed those investigations, and the rides were found to be safe. Crowds in the weeks and even months after the incident could be described as modest, and understandably so, as trust in Dreamworld as a park operator was rattled, and the park's offerings were impacted by the ongoing safety audits and reduced capacity. On November 9th, 2016, Ardent Leisure Chief Executive Deborah Thomas confirmed that the Thunder River Rapids ride would not reopen, and after investigations concluded, the ride's structures were demolished in 2018. While it was inevitable that the ride involved in the incident would never reopen, further scrutiny on the safety and reliability of Dreamworld's rides led to a spree of closures over the coming years as the park sought to remove and replace older attractions. A notable example was the Rocky Hollow Log Ride. This ride had faced modifications after an earlier incident in 2016 where a rider had fallen from the log after standing up during the ride. Due perhaps in part to this incident, as well as being the park's other water ride, Rocky Hollow faced one of the lengthiest closures of any of the rides during the auditing phase and would close permanently in 2020. Other rides that closed in the years following the Thunder River Rapids incident included Tower of Terror and Wipeout. It is important to note that none of these rides were closed due to safety issues, but rather because of their increasing age and maintenance issues. However, the first change that I'm going to propose is that if Dreamworld's safety had never come under question, at least some of those rides may still be in the park today. Thunder River Rapids, Rocky Hollow, Tower of Terror, and Wipeout, in particular, were iconic Dreamworld rides that had been at the park for decades and become guest favorites. While Tower of Terror and Wipeout's reliability issues were well known and documented, it is possible that the park would have wanted to keep them around if the park's image of safety had not come under such intense scrutiny. At the very least, I believe that the park may have staggered those closures out much more, and that at least 1 or 2 of those rides would have still been in operation today. While reliability was to blame for the majority of those closures, the bad optics of having old or unreliable rides that frequently break down in the aftermath of an accident that was caused by a ride malfunction was almost certainly a deciding factor in the ride's fate to be removed instead of ongoing repairs. Personally, I think that had the incident not occurred, we would still have Gold Rush Country and Rocky Hollow to this day, at the very least. Tower of Terror and Wipeout had been undergoing extensive maintenance works for quite some time before the incident, so I believe that they may have closed in the decade since regardless. But Gold Rush still being around brings me to my next change: the new rides that might never have been built. Steel Taipan is the biggest and most obvious example of these. This Mark Bluefire clone was constructed on the former site of Gold Rush Country after Thunder River Rapids and the Eureka Mountain Mine Ride were demolished. This represented a complete departure from the Gold Rush land, which was understandable given the connotations that it would now carry. However, if that incident had never occurred, I don't believe that Dreamworld would have wanted to remove such a staple and iconic land at the park that had been around since the 1980s unnecessarily. And without such a large section of the park suddenly being demolished and empty of attractions, the park certainly would never have had the space to construct a Bluefire clone. I think it's safe to say that in this alternate universe Dreamworld, Steel Taipan does not exist. But what about the other new attractions that have come since? For example, what about Rivertown, King Claw, and Sky Voyager? Dreamworld's recent investment into these attractions has come after a major change in management and a shift towards a future plan that includes significant investment in reconstructing and rejuvenating the park. While this restructure occurred years after the Thunder River Rapids incident occurred, I think it's safe to say that Dreamworld have been somewhat compelled by the well-deserved drop in attendance and revenue to make such sweeping changes. If we look at Dreamworld's habits of installing new rides and attractions prior to 2016, it's safe to say that they made big investments much less frequently than they are right now, often going a few years in between big new rides or precincts. At this particular point in time, they're seemingly adding something almost every year. While it's possible that Dreamworld would have sought a new CEO and a new direction for other reasons, like the COVID pandemic for example, or just because they felt they needed a new path, it's definitely not unlikely that in this alternate universe Dreamworld these changes didn't happen. And it's very likely that none of these new attractions were ever built, or maybe only one of them at best. My guess is that Sky Voyager may have still gone ahead, but we would have only seen maybe one other major investment so far this decade, and that the rest of the changes would have been largely more minor ride installations and updates to existing attractions. I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that in our alternate universe 2025 Dreamworld, the park is actually much worse off. Now, this is not to say that the incident was a good thing for the park, but rather that the park's management habits, investments, safety, and upkeep were significantly worse prior to 2016 than they are today. And if such drastic circumstances hadn't forced Dreamworld to make radical changes or risk no longer existing, we may still have those practices in place today. And therefore, our alternate universe Dreamworld is objectively a much more dangerous place, with much worse maintenance, safety, and training practices. The coroner's report into the Thunder River Rapids incident detailed similar occurrences on the ride dating back years that proved Dreamworld knew that these sorts of incidents were a possibility, and that attitude towards safety issues would likely have continued if tragedy hadn't brought it into the limelight. So, what would Dreamworld look like today if Thunder River Rapids had never happened? I think that in this alternate universe, Dreamworld is a much more recognizable place to those who knew it before and around 2016, but also a much more run-down place. Very little has changed, as Dreamworld has not been compelled to close any of its classic older rides out of necessity yet. A few may have come and gone for other reasons. I suspect Tower of Terror, for example, may have met its maker just due to its unreliability, but I'm willing to wager that the track might have still been standing and become an eyesore. Dreamworld did have a habit of leaving closed attractions standing but not operating if they were going to be a hassle to demolish. Perhaps a few new rides like Sky Voyager and a new flat ride or two would have been installed in the years since, but I can't see anything about Dreamworld's spending habits in the 2010s that leads me to believe they would have any new signature rides. This is a park in a much bigger state of disrepair than it actually is in the real world today, or indeed, than we've ever seen it before, with a further 10 years of decay that's probably going relatively unchecked. The moral of the story here is that Dreamworld, at the time of the incident was not on a good trajectory, and that its response to the downturn in attendance after the incident has been a net positive for the park. Let's move outward in scope now and talk about the other Gold Coast parks and how they were impacted by a tragedy taking place within their industry and community. Inevitably, such a significant fatal incident brought increased scrutiny to theme parks, particularly in Queensland, and the other parks felt the sting as well. In January 2017, the ABC reported that Village Roadshow theme parks had seen a 12% drop in attendance compared to the same time the previous year, which had marked a significant drop in revenue, not just in ticket sales, but also in food and beverage and other in-park revenue sources. While this is a more minor impact in comparison to Dreamworld, which the ABC reports had a 63% drop in revenue in the immediate aftermath, it certainly was considerable and enough to force Village Roadshow into some level of damage control as well. In early 2017, Movie World posted a series of videos going into detail about ride safety checks and maintenance procedures in an attempt to engage with the community and reassure potential guests that their rides were safe. Clearly, while not directly implicated in the accident, the park was in damage control trying to repair consumer confidence in theme parks and boost attendance back up. At SeaWorld, the Vikings Revenge Flume ride closed indefinitely for extensive maintenance in November 2016, directly in the aftermath of the accident. Alongside Thunder River Rapids and the Rocky Hollow Log Ride, Vikings Revenge was one of the Gold Coast's last remaining rides that was manufactured in-house by the park. Now, while that doesn't mean that Vikings Revenge was unsafe, it's important to understand some of the added complexity that this would have added for SeaWorld. Whenever a park wishes to make changes to the operating and maintenance procedures of a ride or to modify the ride in any way, it is a requirement for these changes to be approved and certified by a representative of the ride's manufacturer. Ride manufacturers provide parks with what's called a standard operating procedure, and this procedure guides everything that the park does in terms of maintaining and operating the ride. Nothing can be changed or disobeyed about the standard operating procedure without the manufacturer's go-ahead. The added complexity with in-house rides is that there is no external manufacturing company to take on that responsibility. The manufacturer is the park, and they bear the full weight of responsibility for ensuring that the ride is safe from top to bottom, whether it's the structure, changes to the safety mechanisms, or even just the procedures in the manual. This means that SeaWorld would have borne full responsibility for verifying and certifying the safety of the ride, including employing operational experts and engineers to approve any potential changes further down the line, where usually that job would be outsourced to the experts provided by the manufacturer. Inevitably, therefore, it was announced officially on December 10th, 2016 that Vikings Revenge would be removed from the park. Vikings Revenge could certainly be considered one of the other major casualties in terms of rides in the aftermath of the Thunder River Rapids incident. In reality, what the Thunder River Rapids incident exposed was that rides manufactured in-house rely solely on the diligence of the park for their upkeep and safety. When Dreamworld's safety and maintenance standards dropped, there was no external oversight from a manufacturer to hold them accountable. The park was solely responsible for writing the safety procedures, making modifications to the ride, and verifying the efficacy of those modifications, and tragically, this was not done safely. I think that it's clear that we will never see another in-house manufactured ride come to the Gold Coast, or Queensland, or perhaps even to Australia. There are very few remaining already. Had this incident never occurred, the risks of bearing the full weight of responsibility on the parks might never have been considered such a risk. And Vikings Revenge, and perhaps some of Dreamworld's rides as well, might still be around. However, Village Roadshow's response went beyond simply closing down their one in-house built ride, and my next change in our alternate universe is that our ride operations, particularly at the Village Roadshow parks, might actually be a little bit faster. At both Movie World and SeaWorld, rides underwent thorough safety inspections and drastic changes to their operating procedures over the following years. According to several VRTP employees that have spoken to me about their jobs personally in the past, the procedures were basically completely overhauled in response to the incident, with safety becoming paramount over efficiency or ease of operations. Undoubtedly, this means that the other Gold Coast parks, as well as Dreamworld, are now safer than ever before, and that's a fantastic thing. But it also means that much has changed in terms of ride efficiency at the park, and this is something that overseas enthusiasts who visit our parks have noticed. but it's not an accident. Let's look back at Dreamworld to understand what is going on here. When Steel Type M was added, the ride included a new feature where attendants are required to tap an RFID tag to verify that a restraint has been locked and checked. You might ask what the purpose of this is. If a ride computer can verify that a restraint is locked just by its position, why add this extra step? The answer is actually to intentionally slow the ride attendant down. In a high-pressure environment, we tend to want to do our job faster and meet the demands of the guests in line, but when we do things faster, we tend to rush. And rushing means a higher chance of making a mistake. These RFID tags are just another task that the attendant has to consider. It slows them down just enough to make sure they actually have to think and spend some time checking each lap bar. These kinds of changes have been made across the board at all of the Gold Coast theme parks, whether it's Movie World's rule of ensuring guests don't do their own seatbelts on certain rides, forcing the attendants to do the seatbelt for them, or the rule that the air gates cannot open until the platform is clear, which occurs at most of our parks. The parks modified their procedures, and in some cases, even their rides, to intentionally slow things down and focus on safety. In the aftermath of tragedy, they decided to prioritize being safe and sure over being fast. And we're still seeing that policy in place today. So how would Movie World and SeaWorld in particular look today if Thunder River Rapids had never happened? The answer is harder to say than Dreamworld. Sure, there's a chance that Viking's Revenge may still be around if they'd maintained it well enough, and perhaps some modifications to rides like the removal of Wild West Falls' moving platform, for example, might never have been made if the parks had continued their previous standards of efficiency alongside safety and never been forced to be extra critical of their safety procedures. The operating procedures would certainly look different, that's for sure. But interestingly, I also think that Village Roadshow might be in a stronger position in this alternate universe, mainly because I think Dreamworld would be in a much weaker position. As we mentioned in the first chapter of this video, over the last 10 years, Dreamworld has improved drastically, entirely out of necessity. It was improve or potentially shut your gates. They had to improve their image, and they've done a fairly good job at that. Right now, I would say they are making better choices and bigger strides than Movie World or SeaWorld are. A weaker Dreamworld with more dated attractions and poorer upkeep could have meant that VRTP's market share and crowd levels would be significantly higher in Alternate Universe 2025 than they are in Real World 2025. And with 10 years of earning slightly more money than their competition, who knows what they might have been able to do with that extra cash by now. I couldn't even speculate, but I would definitely say that as an indirect result thanks to Dreamworld's forced response to the incident, VRTP don't hold as much of a monopoly over the theme park industry on the Gold Coast as they might have otherwise. Which is a testament solely to Dreamworld's activity over the past few years, because an act of negligence like that could very easily have gone the other way and gifted VRTP more of the public's confidence, or indeed even resulted in Dreamworld's closure. Lastly, I want to turn my attention to the rest of Australia because I think there are a few things that might have altered at other parks around the country in this alternate universe. Firstly, one direct impact, I don't think that Gumbaya World would have Project Zero in our alternate Thunder River Rapids free universe. Gumbaya World purchased their Maurer Skyloop from Dreamworld in 2021. It formerly operated at Dreamworld as Buzzsaw from 2011 to 2020, sitting at the front of the park on the edge of Gold Rush Country right next to the station of the Thunder River Rapids ride. There were several reasons that I believe Dreamworld chose to sell Buzzsaw. It had proven to be rather unreliable at times, often facing extensive downtime and probably costing the park a lot in maintenance and spare parts. As I mentioned in our first chapter, however, I don't think that Dreamworld would have been so eager to give all of their unreliable rides the chop if they weren't trying to so eagerly change their image. Buzzsaw was only at Dreamworld for 10 years, and I do believe that another significant factor in its removal was that it was part of Gold Rush Country, an area of the park that Dreamworld were quite eager to clean their hands of. Thunder River Rapids and Eureka Mountain Mine Ride were very promptly removed after the incident and the investigations concluded, leaving Buzzsaw awkwardly wedged into the front of the park for a few years, not really fitting anywhere thematically, and even being sort of hard to access for a while, particularly when Gold Rush Country was largely fenced off to the public during investigations. If this had never happened, I think that Dreamworld may have given Buzzsaw just a bit more time and effort. We've seen unreliable rides last much longer at our parks and even at Dreamworld, with repeated attempts to keep them above water through extensive maintenance. Sure, it wasn't the most popular ride in the park, but I think that Dreamworld's big plans to extensively overhaul the area was probably a factor in the decision, and therefore I believe that if Thunder River Rapids had never turned fatal, Buzzsaw would have stayed at the park at least a little bit longer. I see two possibilities. Either the ride would still be at Dreamworld today, or it would have stayed slightly longer and then simply been scrapped when Dreamworld gave up trying on it. The deal for Project Zero seemed to be something of a matter of convenient timing for Gumbaya World, and if 2021 had rolled around and the ride was not for sale, then I think they would have simply built something else. If we're assuming that the COVID pandemic still happened in our alternate universe, then I think TNT would have still happened, but the park might have simply just built the one coaster, or found another ride to be built alongside it. Who knows what that might have been. Indirect impact number 2, I think the Luna Park Sydney Wild Mouse renovation would not have been delayed as badly as it was. This one might require some explanation. In August 2022, the Wild Mouse went down for unexpected maintenance. Luna Park later announced that the ride would be undergoing an extensive refurbishment. This refurbishment would ultimately be repeatedly delayed until finally reopening earlier this year. I don't have an inside source on the cause of those delays, but I suspect that a large part of it was due to the park having to precariously balance safety regulations with the heritage requirements on the ride. They weren't able to make any significant modifications to the ride, but it still had to somehow meet modern safety requirements. And I think a big part of why that process was seemingly so arduous was that, much like Viking's Revenge, the manufacturer responsible for the Wild Mouse is Luna Park itself. Now, this is pure speculation, but I think that this fact may have raised some red flags among the workplace health and safety departments responsible, and that the park may have spent weeks and months trying to jump through hoops and wade through red tape. Now, this might have still been the case without a fatal incident in recent memory, but I think there's a reason to believe that in our alternate universe, the requirements may not have been quite so rigorous. I believe that we may have got Wild Mouse back much sooner without the knock-on effect of the heightened focus on theme park safety. But I also think there may have been some other indirect effects on parks around the country as well. It's important to remember that prior to 2016, Australia's theme parks had seen no fatal incidents since the Luna Park Sydney Ghost Train fire of 1979, and even then, the cause of that fire has long been disputed, and the ambiguity and mystery of the circumstances surrounding it meant it didn't really impact public trust in theme parks overall quite as much as a ride malfunction incident would. Fires can happen anywhere, after all. Similar circumstances happened following the fatal accident on Fujin Raijin 2 at Expo Land in Japan in 2007. This accident was a first as well, and it so shocked the nation and rattled the Japanese public's confidence in theme park safety that we're still seeing the effects today, with many smaller amusement parks either closing or falling into states of disrepair as operators struggle to keep up with rising insurance costs amid dwindling attendance. Such a widely publicized, tragic, and awful incident really bruised the Australian public's confidence that theme parks are safe places. And one very obvious change is that attendance has dropped. While it may look like those numbers have recovered today, it's hard to say how much bigger the growth might have been if the public's trust in parks hadn't been dented in such a way. In our alternate 2025, my guess is that attendances would be higher across the board, particularly on the Gold Coast. We might have seen some more small amusement parks and attractions find success if they had lower insurance premiums. Ultimately, I think there's a real case to be made that our theme parks would be much more prosperous in this alternate 2025. The gap between having a spotless safety track record and a safety track record with one major blemish is absolutely huge when it comes to public trust. The moment the public has one major incident to recall, there's always going to be those who lose trust in the industry and choose to spend their time and money elsewhere. It's hard to say how big that impact has been in the long term now that we're almost 10 years on, but I think the impact definitely would be there. And lastly, I do want to make mention that I think our alternate 2025 would be a much less hostile place for small theme parks and amusement parks. I briefly made this point before, but in a world of rising costs, things like public liability insurance are quickly becoming unaffordable for a lot of people. I've said in my videos before that I think Australia is a really inhospitable place for small regional attractions and amusement parks, and I think that shows in how few of them we have remaining in such a big country. Places like Green Valley Farm, the Big Banana, and the Magic Mountain are quickly becoming the exception, not the rule. It's no secret that Thunder River Rapids made insurance companies a lot more wary about theme park rides, and in a world where it never happened, maybe that slight difference in overhead costs could have seen one of those parks able to invest a little more in a new attraction, or even another attraction to take their first steps into the theme park world. Who really knows? I'd love to hear what you've noticed about how the theme park world has changed since 2016. Please leave a comment below, but remember to keep it respectful and appropriate. At the end of the day, we are making reference to an incident that took the lives of 4 innocent people and changed the lives of so many more. I'd love to hear your speculation on what rides might still be around, what rides might never have opened, and how the parks might look different in our alternate universe, but again, please be respectful and appropriate. Just before we get to our outro, I want to make sure that I'm using this style of video to do some good. I'm comfortable to wade into uncomfortable topics on the channel, but I certainly don't want to be raking in ad revenue from people's morbid curiosity about tragedy. I'm going to be donating this video's ad revenue for the month to Doctors Without Borders. Every day, Doctors Without Borders funds emergency medical aid to people in crisis in over 75 countries. They're an independent, impartial, and neutral organization dedicated to providing the highest quality of medical care possible wherever it is needed. They've administered over 16 million medical consultations, 1.3 million vaccines against measles in response to outbreaks, and have admitted 1.6 million patients in need to hospitals to get the urgent care they require. Right now, some of their most crucial work is in Gaza, where their teams are bearing witness to mass killings, forced displacement, destruction of vital civilian infrastructure, and a siege cutting off access to food, water, medicines, and other supplies. 1 million Palestinians, including hundreds of newborn babies and critically ill patients, are being driven out of Gaza City and into under-resourced areas by relentless bombing and forced military displacement. In Palestine, Doctors Without Borders have distributed 37 million gallons of clean drinking water and provided over 750,000 outpatient consultations. Their work is vital. I'll be donating this video's revenue to Doctors Without Borders at the end of the month, and I encourage you to join me by heading to doctorswithoutborders.org to donate today. Let's do some good. Before we go, I want to give a shout out to a commenter at Iscod on YouTube. Iscod said that SLCs get a lot of hate, but they're convinced that the average enthusiast just has a weak neck and they've never banged their head on a vest restraint on an SLC. Thanks for your comment, Iscod. I'm not sure which SLC specifically you've ridden, but the ones with vest restraints don't tend to be the problematic ones. The original over-the-shoulder restraint is far worse if the problem is headbanging. It's bulky and sits very close to the rider's ears, so even slight shuffling or roughness can result in headbanging, and the shuffling and roughness on most SLCs is anything but slight. But I definitely get why some people enjoy them. They're intense, I'll give them that. Thank you so much for watching and for being a supporter of my channel. If you'd like to be featured in my next video, you can leave a comment, send a message in my Discord linked in the description, or you can send me something in the mail. My PO box details are on the screen now. For now, this is Maloney's Coasters from this timeline, reminding you to be kind to one another, have a lovely day, and keep gaining credits. Bye.